Dictators. They're a weird bunch. While the usual suspects, Hitler, Stalin, Mao, get all the press, history's most bizarre rulers were often far stranger, madder, and funnier than the big names. We're talking world leaders who banned dentistry, built entire armies of concrete bunkers, and even tried declaring war on monkeys. If you think modern politics is crazy, buckle up. Today on Tenfold Gold, we're giving you 10 of history's most ridiculously over-the-top dictators. Each stranger, more eccentric and more egomaniacal than the last. By the end, you'll be asking yourself, how on earth did these guys get to run an entire country? So, polish your medals, erect a golden statue of yourself, hit subscribe, and let's meet history's ultimate egomaniacs. We're starting with Saparmurat Niyazov, Turkmenistan's king of crazy. When you rename months of the year after yourself and your mum, you've officially reached peak dictator. Saparmurat Niyazov, better known as Turkmenbashi, meaning leader of all Turkmen, wasn't just eccentric, he elevated madness into an art form. His country's calendar included January becoming Turkmenbashi, his self-styled nickname, and April renamed in honor of his mother, Gurban Sultan. You could literally spend your birthday on the 17th of Mum month. But his nuttiness didn't end there. Niyazov banned beards, outlawed ballet for being un-Turkmen, and bizarrely made dentistry illegal in rural areas. Because who needs dentists anyway? He wrote a book called the Ruhnama, which citizens had to memorize if they wanted a driver's license or a job, or basically any kind of decent life. In 2005, he even launched the book into space, presumably to inflict his literary genius on aliens. And yes, the golden statues of himself were everywhere. The most notorious of them rotated so it was always facing the sun, because if you're going to be vain, why be subtle about it? Next up, Enver Hoxha, Albania's paranoid bunker king. If paranoia had a face, it'd be the grimly stern expression of Enver Hoxha. Albania's reclusive leader didn't just distrust foreign powers, he distrusted everyone, so much so that he built over 170,000 concrete bunkers across the country. That's roughly one bunker per family, or one for every 11 people. Just in case, everyone tried to invade Albania simultaneously. But Hoxha's paranoia wasn't limited to military matters. He outlawed beards. Dictators clearly have issues with facial hair, banned private car ownership, shut down all religious institutions, and decreed color televisions illegal, because color entertainment might corrupt his gray socialist utopia. He banned jazz music too, possibly for being suspiciously fun. To top it off, Hoxha enforced extreme isolation. Traveling abroad was banned, religion was crushed, and dissent was swiftly silenced. Under his rule, Albania became Europe's most isolated, paranoid, and frankly bizarre nation. Next is Ne Win, Myanmar's numerological nightmare. When Myanmar's Ne Win wasn't busy ruling with an iron fist, he was obsessively poring over astrology charts and counting his lucky numbers. Numerology dominated every aspect of his life, especially his fascination with the number 9. In 1987, he abruptly replaced standard banknotes like the 50 and 100 kyat with denominations divisible by 9, like 45 and 90. This utterly random decision immediately wiped out people's savings and plunged the economy into chaos overnight. Predictably, Ne Win's eccentricities didn't end there. Convinced of magical conspiracies against him, he had his fortune teller appoint as his chief policy advisor. Because obviously, nothing can go wrong when national decisions are based on star charts and lucky numbers. Ne Win's love of superstition reached genuinely surreal levels. He'd occasionally bathe in dolphin blood, believing it would prolong his life, and sometimes walked backwards across bridges to ward off evil spirits. Who needs economic sense when you have lucky numbers and astrology? Now it's time for Rafael Trujillo, the Dominican narcissist. If Rafael Trujillo were alive today, he'd need to have more followers than any influencer on Instagram, because nobody in history ever loved themselves quite as much as Trujillo did. Dictator of the Dominican Republic from 1930, he quickly renamed the capital city Santo Domingo, Ciudad Trujillo, because clearly, naming a mere street or an airport after yourself is amateur stuff. Trujillo was so convinced of his divine status that he ordered churches to display slogans reading, "God in heaven, Trujillo on earth." Churches that refused mysteriously burnt down. He plastered his face on every public building and currency note, and even insisted that every car number plate carry slogans like, "Long live Trujillo." He was also obsessed with whitening the country's population through immigration, cosmetics, and sinister policies. Modesty clearly wasn't in his dictionary, or any dictionary he allowed people to own. Next dictator, Francisco Macias Ngima, the man who declared war on monkeys. Francisco Macias Ngima, dictator of Equatorial Guinea, might genuinely be history's most unhinged ruler. After shutting down schools, banning libraries, and outlawing any form of intellectual pursuit, because who needs smart people anyway, Ngima declared himself immortal and claimed to possess deadly psychic powers. When enemies inconveniently failed to die from his mind attacks, he opted for traditional execution methods instead. But perhaps his weirdest decision was declaring monkeys to be enemy spies. Soldiers were ordered to wipe out primates nationwide, starting an absurd war against innocent wildlife. Nguema's rule eventually plunged his country into complete chaos and ruin, with citizens forced into subsistence farming while he lived luxuriously, surrounded by bodyguards and convinced of his own supernatural invincibility. His eventual overthrow was inevitable, but his legacy as history's strangest monkey-hating dictator lives on. Romania's Nicolae Ceausescu, the man who built a palace while his country starved. Dictators love a bit of self-indulgence, but Nicolae Ceausescu took it to an entirely new level. While Romania's people struggled with food shortages, blackouts, and rationing, Ceausescu decided the real priority was an 1,100-room palace. The colossal Palace of the Parliament in Bucharest was so mind-bogglingly big that it remains the second-largest government building in the world today, only beaten by the Pentagon. To finance this monstrous vanity project, Ceausescu imposed extreme austerity measures. People queued for hours for basic necessities, homes were kept freezing in winter, and yet Ceausescu still had the audacity to appear on state TV insisting everything was fine. His wife, Elena, an unqualified chemical factory worker, somehow became Romania's top scientist and held multiple high-ranking government positions, despite barely being literate. Ceausescu's reign ended with an iconic moment of dictator karma. After giving one of his infamous propaganda speeches in December 1989, the normally obedient crowd suddenly started booing. Within days, he and Elena were captured and executed after a 2-hour trial. Turns out, starving an entire nation while building a palace bigger than Disneyland isn't a long-term leadership strategy. Now here's François Duvalier, Haiti's voodoo tyrant. François Papa Doc Duvalier didn't just rule Haiti, he turned himself into a living god. A staunch believer in voodoo, he claimed to be Baron Samedi, the literal spirit of death. To prove the point, he dressed in black suits, wore dark sunglasses day and night, and spoke in ominous riddles. If that wasn't theatrical enough, he surrounded himself with the Tonton Macoute, a secret police force that combined traditional brutality with a hefty dose of supernatural creepiness. Dressed in blue denim and wearing mirrored sunglasses, they spread the belief that Duvalier could control people's souls even after death. Those who defied him often met mysterious fates, vanishing, found mutilated, or on occasion, publicly sacrificed to prove his magical powers. At one point, he claimed to have cursed U.S. President John F. Kennedy to death, and when Kennedy was assassinated, Duvalier took full credit, declaring, "I told you so." By the time he died in 1971, from natural causes, despite all his supposed immortality, he had turned Haiti into an eerie, voodoo-drenched police state that made Orwell's 1984 look like a beach holiday. Number 8. Ferdinand Marcos, the dictator, with 3,000 pairs of shoes. Ferdinand Marcos ruled the Philippines from 1965 to 1986, and if you thought dictators were meant to be subtle about their wealth, Marcos and his wife Imelda disagreed. When he wasn't plundering state funds, he was overseeing some of the worst political repression in Southeast Asia, including assassinations, mass arrests, and martial law. But the true star of the Marcos regime was Imelda Marcos and her insane shopping addiction. When they were finally overthrown, Filipinos stormed the presidential palace and discovered over 3,000 pairs of shoes in Imelda's wardrobe, along with designer gowns, diamond tiaras, and a solid gold toilet seat. Meanwhile, their country was drowning in debt. Marcos had embezzled an estimated $10 billion, which to this day remains one of the largest thefts by a world leader. While he died in exile in 1989, Imelda made a shock return to politics, because nothing says political comeback like a woman whose shoe collection could rival an entire department store. Number 9. Yahya Jammeh, the man who thought he could cure AIDS with bananas. If you ever wanted proof that dictatorship and medical science don't mix, look no further than Yahya Jammeh. Ruler of Gambia from 1994 to 2017, Jammeh believed he could cure AIDS with herbal remedies and bananas. His solution? Forcing HIV-positive citizens to stop taking antiretroviral medication and instead drink his special banana smoothies. Shockingly, this didn't work. Jammeh also believed he had mystical control over the weather, which is probably why he once declared that Gambia would never have a drought. Spoiler, it did. When international organizations tried to intervene in his increasingly deranged rule, he responded by banning the country's entire internet and phone network on multiple occasions. Despite all this, Jammeh held power for 22 years, mostly because he was also fond of arresting, torturing, or executing anyone who didn't share his enthusiasm for miracle fruit-based medicine. Eventually, he was forced into exile after losing an election, proving that even dictators can't govern forever on a banana-based healthcare system. Number 10. John Biadel Bokassa, the Cannibal Emperor. If pure madness had a human form, it would be John Biadel Bokassa, the self-declared Emperor of the Central African Republic. In 1977, Bokassa staged one of the most absurd coronations in history, declaring himself Emperor Bokassa I in a $20 million ceremony, while the country's citizens lived in extreme poverty. The event included a golden throne shaped like an eagle, a diamond-encrusted crown, and a cape modeled after Napoleon's. But his insanity wasn't just limited to fashion. Rumors swirled that Bokassa had a taste for human flesh, with foreign diplomats and government officials quietly avoiding his dinner invitations for fear of becoming the main course. Though never proven, accusations of cannibalism followed him for years, especially after a freezer full of human remains was discovered in his palace. His downfall came when he personally oversaw the torture and execution of schoolchildren who had protested against buying uniforms from his personal factory. This was the last straw, and France, his former ally, finally intervened to remove him. Bokassa was exiled, returned years later, was arrested, and eventually died in relative obscurity, probably still convinced he was a misunderstood genius. And there you have it, 10 of history's most absurd, paranoid, and utterly bonkers dictators. From the man who renamed the months of the year after himself, to a ruler who thought he could control the weather, this list proves that absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it also leads to some deeply strange decisions. Which of these dictators was the most ridiculous? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this dive into history's strangest leaders, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because there's plenty more historical madness where this came from.